me just read it and let me just make my point about the pronoun and then you can respond. Okay, so this is verse 15. A prophet like me will the Lord your God. So who's speaking here in verse 15?
A prophet like me.
Now who's speaking here? A prophet like me will the Lord your God. Who's speaking here?
Must be Moses, yeah.
Moses is speaking.
Yeah.
So who does the your refer to?
Prophet like me will the Lord your God raise up.
Who does your?
Yeah, to Israel, okay.
Yeah, okay, so that establishes the point that this is to Israel, because verse 18, God himself repeats the same words.
So maybe that...
But that's a good point though. Like,
no, it's terrible.
How does Muhammad...
I'm getting there.
How does Muhammad come into it?
I'm getting there.
Because he's not from the line of Moses.
I'm getting there.
Right?
Okay, so it's been established that Moses is speaking to the whole of Israel, correct? So that the pronoun refers to the whole of Israel, yeah? So if the whole of Israel is being referred to, who are the brethren of the whole of Israel?
Well, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but it's a bit of a brain dead way of approaching.
It's not.
I'll tell you what. You can't ignore the actual pasuk. How do you say pasuk? The verse, the actual verse, and go back to like three pasukim before. And when Moses was talking and say, okay, therefore it's talking about the brethren because it's talking about all of Israel. Therefore it's talking about they're also talking about Israel. It's like saying, so why don't you just say everything in the whole Bible when it says you, it's talking about the children of Israel? That doesn't make any sense.
No, but we'd have to look at
you have to look the specific. You want to talk about context?
Yeah, context. Right? We have to look at everything on the
context of that specific verse.
Okay.
Right? Don't ignore that and say, oh, let's talk about context. Oh, let's talk about the context something very, very broad. No, talk about the context of that specific verse.
Is it alright if I carry on my discussion with him after?
That's the context you want to ignore. You want to ignore the actual verse that it's talking about and go back where Moses was talking. It wasn't even God who was talking. When Moses was talking, say, let's talk about that context. Not even that doesn't even make any sense.
1 second. Are you Christian, by the way? Okay, so you could judge between a Jew and a Muslim.
World peace, right here.
World peace, yeah. The Trinity. Okay, so this is the context again. Verse 16 is the key to the context. The whole of Israel in Exodus chapter 18, they were terrified when Hashem spoke to the whole of them publicly. They go to Moses. We do not want to hear the voice of Hashem no more. We're terrified.
You explain that. You explain that.
That is the backdrop. Okay. So in reply to that, this is what verse 16, in reply to that, God says, what they, now who's the they? Israel, have said is good.
But he says who is talking to within that context of that immediate verse.
Let me finish my point.
So wait a second, let me ask you a question. In that case, if you're saying, when he says you, right, you're a prophet, right, so maybe he's saying that the whole of Israel were a prophet, because that's the context. Okay. You're not making any sense.
1 second.
That conversation changes what you're talking about. Sometimes if I say you and I'm looking at you and I'm talking about your head, I'm talking to you, if I suddenly change and talk about him, even though it's the same conversation, I'm suddenly talking about him. You have to look at that specific verse, exactly what he's saying. You have to look at that verse, what he's saying.
Let me finish my point.
That verse is very, very clear what it's saying.
Okay.
It's saying very, very clearly, the context is very clear. He's talking to Moses because he says you as a prophet. So he must be talking to Moses. Right? So and it doesn't make any sense.
Let me finish my point.
Talking about the
Firstly,
children of Israel.
you admitted, you gotta be fair, that you were wrong when you said that this was talking to Moses, when you admitted after it was Moses speaking to Israel, correct? You're gonna agree with that? You just repeated it now, God. You said God speaking to Moses, but the context you admitted was Moses speaking to Israel, the words of God, correct?
No, but that later verse is not.
But that was verse 15, it was the first verse.
I'm not familiar, but get to the verse where he says that.
Okay, Deuteronomy 15,
Obviously Moses is not talking to himself.
Yeah, I know.
It's God talking to Moses.
Yes, yeah, but Moses is speaking to Israel.
Okay, well, there's a conversation going on. You know? It changes who's talking.
Yeah, I know. But let's be clear because I'm trying to get to my point, but you're not. I want to. Verse 15 again.
It's unbelievable how. Okay, well, I want to.
But I haven't made my point yet.
Okay, well.
Okay. The first point. If you give me 3 minutes, I'll give you 3 minutes. Is that fair?
No, way too long.
All right, 2 minutes.
30 seconds each.
1 minute.
Okay, 45 seconds. Done. Deal done.
47 seconds.
Done.
All right, we're out of time.
Now,
all right, forget it. A prophet like me, this is verse 15. A prophet like me will the Lord your God raise up for you from among your kinsmen of this translation. Now, who's speaking here? That's the first hint. Moses is speaking. Who is he speaking to?
To Israel.
Okay, so when he says your God will raise up for you, the you and the your is all of Israel, correct? So if the prophet is going to come from among the brethren of these people he's spoken to.
Hold on. Okay, sorry, say.
All right, okay.
No, say again.
All right, okay, one second.
Say that again. Say again.
I'm going to repeat it. And if Israel is spoken of as one person, the pronoun is speaking of them as a singular person, and God speaking about the brethren of a singular person, then a brother cannot be the same person. Israel, the Hebrew is in singular. So God said, from among your and you, Israel in the singular, brethren. Now who is the brother of the singular person referred to as Israel? Who is their brother? Because Israel cannot be his own brother. See, you got to be very deep. See, you know, a lot of people.
You have to understand what you're saying.
I understand exactly what I'm saying. A lot of people. All right, okay. A lot of people read Deuteronomy very superficially. You got to be very, very careful on every little word. Now, if Moses is speaking to you and your, and the you and your in the singular, the you and your, the singular pronoun is referring to the whole of Israel as one person. But this person will come from the brethren of the singular person called Israel. Now, Israel cannot be the brother of singular Israel. So who is the brethren of this person?
So so what you're saying is, there was a different. I think he brought a different verse, and I was referring to that one, where God's talking to Moses, right? Well, did you bring a verse where God's talking to Moses?
Yes.
Last week.
Deuteronomy 18.
What same?
Deuteronomy 18.
So
I'm going to read it.
I thought it was God speaking to Moses.
You know what I think it is? What I think it is this translation, they've translated verse 15 similar to verse 18. So what the actual is God speaks to Moses in verse 15, and then in verse 18, God repeats it to all of Israel. But what I think this Christian translation done is they made 18 and 15 the same.
A prophet like me, for the Lord, you got raised from among your own kinsmen. To him you shall listen. Okay. From among your own kinsmen. I don't understand. How do you get from among
Who's speaking Moses, correct?
Yeah.
Who is the your and you?
The children of Israel.
Do you agree that the Hebrew is in the singular, the pronoun?
I don't know the.
You can check that because I'm not a Christian to make up quotes, innit? I'll be accurate with my quotes. The Hebrew is in the singular. So if God is speaking, if Moses is speaking to Israel as a singular person and saying this prophet will arise from the brethren of the singular person, then how can it be an Israelite or Israel? No Israelite is a brethren of singular Israel. You understand? Israel is being spoken of as one person here. Just like in Exodus chapter 4 verse 22, when God says Israel is my son, even my firstborn. Israel was spoken of in the singular many times in the Bible. So here the singular person Israel is being told a prophet will arise from their brethren, which means this person can't be included in Israel.
But he explains exactly what he means by saying among your own kinsmen.
Kinsman, the word is same as the Arabic relative, cousin, brother.
Okay, but he's
So kinsman, my kinsman can be my second cousin, my third cousin.
yeah. Look, I mean, if you're okay, it's an interesting point, but I mean.
Okay, let's move on from that point and we can all research more.
I'll check that out. Yeah.
All right, my next question is, who do you believe it's referring to?
What?
Who do you believe this is referring to? Who was Moses speaking about? Who did God mean? Who was his prophet?
All the prophets, all the future prophets.
Isn't it in the singular? A raise up a prophet. Now I understand the argument can work both ways, but
I mean, look, why he used the term singular, I don't know. There's many possible reasons, and you're giving one possible interpretation. But you know, it's not the only possible interpretation.
But there's another issue in the book of Deuteronomy that rules out that it can be any Israelite prophet. There's another issue in the book of Deuteronomy that rules out that this prophet can be an Israelite.
Okay, what's that?
Because the prophet has to be like Moses. That's the key, yeah? Like Moses. Correct?
Yeah.
That's what the text says.
Yeah, like
Yeah? Deuteronomy 34, verse number 10. Moses has a vision of the future, and the text says, and there shall not arise again in Israel a prophet like unto Moses. And the Chumash Jewish commentary, and if you go to Sifrei Deuteronomy, they admit that there'll never arise again in Israel a prophet like Moses. But there may be a possible one from the Gentile nations. That's what Sifrei Deuteronomy says.
What's this difference?
In the Sifrei ancient commentaries on Deuteronomy, they admit on verse 34, Deuteronomy 34, verse number 10, that the statement that there shall not arise again in Israel a prophet like unto Moses means that there shall never be one in Israel, but it's possible a Gentile nation could have one.
Can't comment. Never heard of that. Never heard of that.
Okay, so what's your understanding of Deuteronomy 34, verse number 10, where Moses has a vision that he'll die at the age of 120. No one will know where his grave is to this day, which applies to now. And there arose not again in Israel a prophet like Moses. So why would God in the same book say a prophet like you, but then in the same book, nobody in Israel like you?
We're waiting for the Messiah, isn't it?
But Messiah can't even be like Moses, because Messiah's Israelite, isn't he?
Yeah, so.
Well, he's ruled out from the
No, you didn't rule him out. You said there's an interpretation that you could say that it rules him out. But you can also have interpretation that it doesn't rule him out.
Do you want to interpret it?
I just said, if you have the idea of using the singular, could be many reasons. You're bringing a specific interpretation of why you use singular, and that could be there could be many other reasons why you use singular, right? So that's one interpretation. It's not the only interpretation. Okay.
So when Moses has a vision that there shall not arise again in Israel a prophet like unto Moses, what other possible interpretation could there be of that?
Things are quite clear.
Things are clear. No Israelite prophet like Moses.
What? Say again?
There shall not arise again in Israel a prophet like Moses.
He says that there will arise.
No. Yeah, this is the contradiction. This is why the Jewish Study Bible, because
where does it say there will not rise?
Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse number 10, and there shall not arise again a prophet like Moses, and there shall not arise in Israel a prophet like unto Moses.
It's a good question.
See, in the ancient rabbinical commentaries, they said what I said to you earlier, that this means that there shall never be an Israelite prophet like Moses, but it's possible among the Gentile nations. You can check
based on those two verses.
You can check Art Scrolls translation as well with the commentary, or you can check Sifrei Deuteronomy. But the modern Jewish Study Bible, not going with that interpretation, they call their flat-out contradiction. They go, how can it be possible one place like Moses, other place not like Moses? But the only reason they see that contradiction is because they don't want to extend brethren to the Arabs.
Okay. No, that's interesting. I'll have a look at that. That's interesting.
Okay. All right. And then so also another thing is, when you say many prophets in that, why is it many prophets, not a singular prophet? Like if you look at ancient Jewish texts, the Dead Sea Scrolls, even the New Testament, for what it's worth, still contains some history, some historical data in it. Whether the New Testament is the word of God or not, there's still history in there. The Jewish expectation at the time of the New Testament, time of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and even Arab sources and our Islamic sources show that the Jews there were waiting for a singular prophet like Moses. So why would the interpretation of meaning multiple prophets take precedence over the most ancient interpretation of it? I'm sure no rabbi today will claim he understands the Tanakh better than
Where
those.
does it say there's going to be multiple prophets?
You said that.
No, I did I?
Yeah, you said that when I asked you.
You said there'll be a prophet like Moses.
Yeah, I said, who do you think it refers to? And you said it could refer to multiple prophets. And then I said to you, but it's in the singular. You said, yeah, but...
No, we're talking about whether it comes from the house of Israel or it comes from outside the house. That was a discussion about
Let's
you.
put aside whether it's outside the house of Israel or inside the house of Israel, because we've spoke about
That's not the
that.
context.
And you said you'll research it more. But who specifically is it speaking about? Is it a specific person or is it 100 prophets who come from Israel? Or is it...
It says a prophet. Let's assume
Have you heard of Rabbi Tovia Singer?
Tovia Singer.
Well, he's one of the leading Jewish apologists in the world today. He debates Messianic Jews, the square circles. Yeah. He himself claims that he's talking about Joshua. And you know, when I read ancient Muslim books who had debates with Jews in the past 700 years ago, some of them were claiming it's talking about Aaron, some of them were talking about Joshua. So even they thought it's speaking about a specific person. So
Well, that is a specific person. They just don't disagree with which specific person it is.
but I can rule out both of them in 1 minute. But I would like to ask you, who do you think is speaking about?
I have
Because
no idea.
how long have you been practicing Judaism, if you don't mind me asking?
Since always.
So, with all due respect, why would you not have an idea over such a specific prophecy, which not only is a prophecy, but in the same verses, God says that if you do not listen to this prophet, the words that he speaks in my name, I shall require it of you. And that is a clear-cut threat to Israel. So why would you not have studied this passage?
Well, I mean, for me, Judaism is tradition, right? So I don't know how everything fits together. There's I have loads and loads and loads of questions. I mean, to me, this is a incredibly minor one, right?
God threatening you is a minor issue.
No, yeah, because you have to, in order to have that threat, you have to have all these definitions and all these complicated things. Does it mean singular? Does it mean this?
Yeah, but this is what studying the Torah is supposed to be,
but
right?
they're very complex interpretations, right? And they're very complex questions where you have to. It's not saying clearly something. It's saying you've got a contradiction, and in order to resolve the contradiction, you have to have this interpretation. That's incredibly complex. It's completely different to saying, right? God saying, do this or don't do that. Now, when it comes to that's when with the complexities, right? I have a much bigger problem with things that are much clearer, and I have loads and loads of problems with it. But I don't know the answer, and I don't, that's it. I don't know. I don't look into it because it doesn't really interest me that much. And I'm not going to look into the big problems. I'm certainly not going to look into the small ones.
So we've gone past those 2-3 issues, yeah. Now, my next point is what was it now? What was I going to say? I forgot what I was going to say.
Never mind.
But anyway, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Next time. But remember, look for you.